I did something different, which was I just had a fucking stroke on the podcast. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses a culture through various segments. You can find us on all the social media, including Twitter and Instagram. Those are both at The Nerds Podcast. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Nerds Podcast. And for any of you Google employees out there, we do have a Google Plus page as well. You can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com, including our YouTube channel, which of course you can also find on youtube.com/The Nerds Podcast, where I do 3 to 4 live streams a week. Plus I usually have about 1 or 2 edited gaming content videos a week as well. If you do not like YouTube, you're more of a Twitch or a Mixer type of gamer, we do have those pages as well. I do stream on those as well. I kind of do it simultaneously when I stream on YouTube as well. If you're not aware of Mixer is basically the Google Plus of streaming services. So if you're on that, check us out. I think Twitch is at The Nerds Podcast, and Mixer, I think, is my gamer tag, Patty McNinja. So check it out there. And for any movie buffs out there, we do have Letterboxd accounts as well, which Letterboxd is basically social media for watching movies. You can tag things. You can basically review, star rating anything that you've seen in the last whatever. And we both have accounts on that, and that's at The Nerds Podcast. And my co-host is at that Tyler Hunt. God damn it, this intro is awful. Anyways, without further ado, I tried to switch it up a little bit, and it did not work out well. Without further ado, I am joined, as always, as my co-host, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty good. It's always nice to start off the podcast with that kind of entertainment. So
yeah, that was awful. Like, I wanted to switch it up for a couple of weeks because I've basically been saying the same shit over and over again for the last, 2 years. I've had that intro down, and I was like, You know what? I'm going to switch it up now, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. I did something different, which was I just had a fucking stroke on the podcast.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, we've been doing this podcast for a long time now. What is this, 225? So 225 episodes, and and by we, I mean more specifically you, have kind of branched us off into other directions. So there's a lot of shit to promote now because there's a lot of ways that you can see the nerdy shit we're into. So in all fairness, there's a lot to remember there.
Yeah, for sure. I just shit the bed a little bit. But how have you been this week? We haven't really talked that much this week.
It's been okay. I don't want to harp on my eye surgery anymore. We got into that a lot last week, but still kind of recovering from that and dealing with some issues there. But could be worse. So I've had a lot of time to watch The Punisher, which we're reviewing this episode, and do a couple other things nerd related. So overall, pretty good week. What about you?
I'm all right. I have to admit that I'm a little upset, not necessarily at you, but just at the entire situation. So I am angry that you got to see Lego Part 2 before I did. I was a little bit irritated about that because we've made no secret that most of the time when you see something that's posted on our social media or interact with us on social media, it's usually me. And so I saw that we were getting a couple of likes on a post, and I was like, oh, cool. What did I post? and I saw that somebody's obviously it was you, said that you were going to see this early. And I was like, am I seeing this early? No, of course not.
I like to chime in every once in a while, but I just, I don't feel like our Facebook followers need to know every move I make. They don't need to know when I'm taking a shit or anything like that, but I was pretty
proud. I feel like that's pretty important.
No, I was pretty happy that I was getting to see it yesterday, so 2 weeks early. I actually checked to see if it was showing in Evansville, because then we could have reviewed it early, which is something that we like to do, like we did with Aquaman and we did with Jumanji. But out of the 500 theaters that they were showing it early in yesterday, there was nothing close to Evansville, so I didn't even text you.
Oh, I was well aware because I heard that this was getting early showings a couple of days ago, and I was like, oh, sweet, because we usually get it in Evansville. I mean, I always joke that Evansville is kind of a pretend city, and it is in so many ways, but we do have quite a few movie theaters, and we generally, when they show something early, like you said with Jumanji or Aquaman, we get it early. And so I was super surprised and very, very disappointed that we weren't getting it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a cool experience. I was surprised that you didn't get to see it because I would have pushed Punisher to the side in a heartbeat to review Lego Movie.
100%.
Spoiler alert for our review in a little bit, but yeah, we got some free Legos, which was cool, and it was pretty much a sold out showing. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of kids, a lot of laughter. So it was a good time, but. Well, you'll have to wait and hear, I guess, what I thought about it in 2 weeks when we review it officially.
So it just occurred to me, and I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but we are reviewing Punisher Season 2, as we've already alluded to a couple of times. And I am looking at Tyler on Skype right now. We do this all on video Skype, and he is wearing his Punisher. I think that was a Marvel Collector thing.
No, it was a Loot Crate. Loot Crate.
Okay, yeah. I can never remember. We got so many of those like a couple of years ago. I don't think either one of us do it that often anymore. And I couldn't remember what that is, but it's a Daredevil Punisher like reversible beanie, and he's wearing the Punisher part, which is not too satisfying on an audio podcast. But I just thought I would point that out. Did you do that on purpose?
100%. I did it out of solidarity for the character and to show that I still support the character, despite what I'm going to say about the show at the end of this podcast.
I just took a couple of screenshots if you're curious what I was doing. I'm definitely gonna post that because I do, on the other side of the spectrum from what you were saying with social media, I feel like everybody needs to know exactly what we're doing all the time.
It's like I'm sitting here with my eye closed because of the surgery. I've got like scruff. I'm not camera ready, man.
Oh, you're camera ready. You just don't know it.
That's fine.
All right, so we start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We don't get to have these nerdy conversations as often as we would like, so we like to start off the podcast by just checking in with each other. We call it What We're Into, so it's basically whatever we watched, played, whatever. So what are you into this week?
So I have talked about Gloomhaven a few times on the podcast before and mentioned that it's a board game that my friends and I currently play on Tabletop Simulator, which is a computer program that's powered by Steam. And as a refresher, Tabletop Simulator is basically a way to play various board games on a computer through a network. So Gloomhaven is this very long and intricate board game that has been compared to Dungeons and Dragons. So one of my nerdier resolutions this year was to be sure that my friends and I continued with this campaign, which is going to take quite a while to finish. And long story short, one of my friends' computers broke. So while he's been out of commission trying to get that fixed for a few weeks, in his absence, my other buddies and I have started to play a new game while we wait for him to come back, and it's called Nemesis. So I wanted to talk about Nemesis a little bit today. So this game is a lot of fun, and it's very intricate. So, I'm going to have a hard time explaining all of its intricacies. So there will definitely be some stuff I leave out purposefully, but I hope to get into the nuts and bolts of the game a little bit. So it's basically a sci-fi horror game. It's an adventure game as well. It's 1 to 5 players. And the best way I think there is to explain the game is to say, basically imagine that you're playing a detailed board game based on the Alien franchise, because this is 100% based on the Alien franchise, but with none of that terminology, because otherwise they'd get sued. So you and the other players wake up from hibernation aboard a spaceship, and each player is acting as a specific member of the crew. So everybody has like their own actions they can do and their own roles and responsibilities. So the crew is waking up because there is a critical system failure and the ship can't continue its course. So the goal, as you can imagine, is to work together to find out what the system issue is so that everyone can safely return to Earth. The problem with that is that this game is semi-cooperative because each player has a secret objective that they have to complete to win the game. So the game can have multiple winners and some people could be losers, or if the ship blows up, all the team is a loser. So on top of that kind of aspect of the game, there's also the aspect that there are intruders that enter the ship that fuck things up for you, and the intruders are aliens. So they are even the figures look somewhat like the xenomorphs in the Alien franchise, and then you have larvae, and you have eggs, and you have a queen, and it's just 1,000% based on Alien, like I said, without being able to be sued. So these intruders can hurt and kill players, and they're a real pain in the ass, as you can imagine. So basically, the way that the gameplay works is that the ship is made up of varying rooms that are locked and flipped over, and the crew just makes their way either together or individually through each room and explores each room and flips them over to where you know what each room does. Each room serves its own purpose, and it has varying items that you can collect. And each time you enter a room, you have to do a noise roll, which determine where noises are made. And if multiple noises are made in the same place, an alien can potentially enter the room with you and fuck you up. So each player does have a weapon and ammunition and can attempt to hurt or kill an alien, but typically it's best to just flee, even though you have a really good chance of getting hurt in the process. So while navigating these rooms and intruders, you also have to keep your objective or objectives in mind, and this is where players start to really not trust one another. So an example I have is the most recent game we played, which we're actually still playing, so I hope that none of the guys I play with listen to this, because then they're going to know what my objective is. But in one room, you can check the coordinates on the ship to make sure that it's headed to Earth. And on my turn, one game, my objective was to go to Mars instead. So I checked the coordinates on my turn, and the coordinates were for deep space. So I told my team that on my next turn, I was going to set the coordinates for Earth, but then I set it to Mars. And then it was up to them whether they wanted to believe me or not. And someone did double check me and found out that I was lying, but luckily I had an alternate objective that makes it okay for me to go to Earth as long as I do something else in the process. So there are also 3 engines on the spaceship, and individually they're either working or not, so a person can check and fix each engine over the course of their turns, but they could also be breaking the engines, and the other players wouldn't know unless they choose a turn to double check them. So if 2/3 of the engines are broken, the ship goes into hyperdrive at the end of the game, and it blows up and everyone loses and dies. So obviously there's a lot of nuances to the game, and there are a lot of rounds to the game as well, and I think it's like something like 15 or 16 rounds to complete all of this stuff, and then you basically get back into hibernation, or you can get into an escape pod, and once all characters have done their rounds or their rounds run out, the game is over and everything is resolved. So overall, I mean, it's a ton of fun, and while it's a somewhat more complex game, it's something that I'd really like to play more often. The problem is that it's a Kickstarter, so right now there are no good ways to get a physical copy of the game, because I think the campaign on Kickstarter is over. So people that chimed into the Kickstarter and got the physical copy for like $100 are now selling it for hundreds of dollars on eBay and other aftermarket places. So hopefully the whole point was for this game to go into production, because once it's available to buy reasonably, I'm definitely going to pick it up because it's a lot of fun.
The thing that I got out of that entire spiel about that game is that you guys are a lot sweeter of friends than I am, because there is no way that I would wait for this other person to get their computer fixed. So this is not what I'm into, but me and my buddy Alex from Batsu Cosplay, which you can check him up on YouTube as well, he started to kind of dip his toes into gaming on his YouTube channel as well. He mostly does like challenge videos and cosplay videos. And he was like, hey man, I just got this new game, A Way Out, which actually came out last year. And he was like, but I need somebody else to play. Do you want to play with me? And I was like, yeah, man, let's start streaming it. And so we actually started streaming it last week. We finished it because it's not very long. And it's a strictly co-op game. And there was a couple of times in the game where I'm just like, well, I got, like, Alex is stuck. I'm like, deuces, I'm out of here. But you can't just leave the person behind, because it's a co-op game and you can't continue without that other person. But you sound like a lot of better friend than I am, because I try to leave Alex behind a couple of times in that game.
Oh, believe me, we would have 1,000% continued with Gloomhaven if we could have. But it's one of those things that we're like months into this campaign, and we've established that we have these 4 characters that are going through the campaign. So until he gets his broke ass computer fix, then we're kind of stuck in a holding pattern. But at the end of the day, I'm glad, because Nemesis is a really fun game, and like I said, I do plan on buying it if it's ever available for a decent price. So at the end of the day, at least I got to play a new board game out of it.
For sure. And I guess we didn't need any more evidence that you're a better friend than me.
All right, man. What are you into?
So like I said, I'm not going to talk about A Way Out. I might talk about it on a future episode, but there was something that I watched last night that I definitely wanted to talk about. And I was actually planning on talking about Polar, which is a Netflix original movie. But if you follow us on Instagram, which you should, it's at the Nerds Podcast again. I basically gave up on that movie like 15 fucking minutes into it because fuck that movie. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically a dog dies in like 15 minutes of that movie, and I fucking refuse to watch a movie like that. So yeah, I turned it off. My wife and I were like upset afterwards. So I didn't watch Polar because, again, fuck that movie. So I decided to watch a different Netflix exclusive movie, which is a movie that I've been wanting to watch, and Tyler talked about it. I think it was last episode, Black Mirror Bandersnatch, which is, I don't want to say choose your own adventure because I don't want to get sued, because apparently that's a big deal right now that Netflix is getting sued, but it's like an interactive movie. So essentially what happens is you get 2 points in this movie and Netflix gives you the option to do this or that with the character or whatever. And essentially the story follows Stefan, a 19-year-old game developer still living with his controlling father, who gets the opportunity of a lifetime to develop his passion project game alongside his idol. However, the combination of the stress of meeting the deadline and past trauma leads Stefan to spiral out of control. So I'm not quite sure where to start because there's a lot to unpack with this movie, but we've talked about other movies that kind of have unique concepts in the past, like A Quiet Place, or most notably, or most recently, Bird Box. And we kind of talked about how those movies can kind of come off gimmicky if they don't pull the concept off. I thought The Quiet Place was a lot better than Bird Box. It almost made my top 10 of last year. And with Bandersnatch, I was kind of afraid this film was going to be kind of the ultimate gimmick. Because those movies, yes, the gimmick or the concept is important, but in a movie where it's interactive or it's choose your own adventure, if that's not fun, then that's everything of the movie. The movie is completely ruined. And so I was really afraid that this was going to be kind of the ultimate gimmick. And it doesn't start off well. Like, it starts off really slow. Literally, the first choice that you have in this movie is like 30 seconds, maybe a minute into the movie, and you choose what cereal he eats for breakfast. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is what this is going to be. We're just going to watch the movie, and we're just going to make like tiny choices that don't fucking matter. Well, luckily, that's not what happens at all. And actually, you picking like tiny things for him, like the cereal at the very beginning of the movie, actually matters later in the movie, because he eventually becomes more aware that he's being controlled. Like, that's a big part of him in this movie, and whether or not he's going psychotic or if it's really like somebody's actually controlling him. And this movie is very meta in that aspect. Like, it plays with the concept really well. I think it would have been very, very easy for them to do what I was afraid that they were going to do at the very beginning, which is just give you tiny, tiny choices that don't affect the plot whatsoever. And it doesn't matter what you pick. You're eventually going to end up at the same place. And I don't know all of the choices. I haven't gone through the tree. I'm sure there's somewhere on Reddit or IGN where they give you all of the branches to all the trees and all the different endings. I haven't checked that out. But what I thought was really, really cool about this movie, and the thing that I enjoyed the most about it, was the fact that it kind of felt like a time travel movie. And I know that I've shit on that genre before, many, many times before on the podcast. I'm not a huge fan of that genre. But what I really liked about this movie and the way that it felt like a time travel movie is in several of those movies, the main character that figures out that they can time travel, they'll go back and try to fix something. And then, of course, when they fast forward to the future, them fixing that thing create this whole huge deal, and just like they opened up a can of worms, and so they go back and try to fix that, and then it just keeps happening and happening, and eventually most of the time with those types of movies or TV shows, the character realizes, okay, well, going back was a bad idea. And so you kind of get that, but you're the character that has to go through that realization, that you have to have that epiphany, that because there's moments in this movie where you choose things and you get to see how those choices pan out for the rest of the story. But then you get to the point where it's just like, oh, well, you can either go back to where you made the wrong choice, or you could just end the movie there, and that's your ending. And so we went back several times. My wife and I watched this together, and we went back several times. And eventually you just get to the point where most of the characters get in those time travel movies that I just described, where you're just like, well, fuck it. Nothing that we are doing is going to fix it, per se. So you kind of just, you have this really shitty choice, and you kind of just have to make it. And that's when the movie truly ended for us. And it was really kind of a fun experience. It's dark. It gets super dark, and you have to make a lot of really, I don't want to say cringeworthy, but you have to make a lot of big decisions that are going to be upsetting, I think, for most people. Like my wife was a little upset at certain choices that I was making, because eventually she just gave me the controller and was just like, hey, you're more into this than I am. You're going to make the choices. And she did not enjoy some of the choices that I made. So all in all, I think that this movie, I don't think this is going to create a new genre of movies. I don't think that we're going to see a string of movies like kind of what we did with Bird Box with A Quiet Place, even though I know that it wasn't ripped off. But I don't think we're going to see that with this type of movie. But it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It was a fun couple hours.
Yeah, I mean, I still plan to dive into this for sure. I'd like to do it with my wife, like how you said you would. I think it'd be a fun social type thing. But again,
oh, yeah.
Can't do it through my Apple TV, so I just have to get off my ass and turn my Xbox on, I guess.
Or you could just turn your controller on, which turns your Xbox on.
Tomato.
But no, I actually think that if I was just sitting by myself in my living room, like late at night, and just watching this by myself, I wouldn't have had as much fun. It's kind of like a party movie.
Yeah, just like a really depressing, dark
party. 100%. Oh, yeah, it gets really dark and depressing for sure, and kind of trippy. Like, there's a scene where these characters do acid, and it gets fucking weird real quick. But it's fun at the same time. It's weird saying that, but it's a lot of fun. I would definitely suggest seeing it with somebody, or maybe even a couple of people, and making choices with that group of people.
Yeah, man, I'll have to do that soon.
All right, so our next segment, Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two an episode. So what'd you read this week?
I feel like every week almost is a game of Russian roulette where maybe we're going to talk about the same comic, but I
highly doubt it.
Yeah, I've at this point I've made the assumption that if you don't text me, then you're reading something that there's no way that I would read. So I read Crypt of Shadows, which was written by Al Ewing, and then it has 3 artists, so Gary Brown, Stephen Green, and, this one's tough, Digibril Morissette Fan. So,
I give you credit for trying.
Yeah, I should.
But there's no way.
Whenever I started writing down the artists and I got to that name, I was like, fuck. But I've already set a precedent where I want to shout out the artist. So I butchered his or her name, so I apologize for that, but I didn't want to just not include them. So I didn't have any expectations going into this book, but I was excited because I knew it was an anthology horror series that was a throwback to classic Marvel comics, so it definitely had the ingredients to be pretty successful. When I found out there were 3 stories, hence the 3 artists involved in this single issue, I figured it would be 3 completely separate stories, like 3 Twilight Zone episodes. But while this is an anthology storytelling situation, all 3 stories are weaved together throughout a character talking to a psychiatrist about his fear of dogs. So he in turn tells her two stories. One is entitled Grave Errors and the other is entitled A Moment of Madness. And it basically explains his cynophobia, which is his fear of dogs, in the title of the third story. So the first story, like I said, is called Grave Errors, and it involves a man sealing himself in a tomb with a dog. And then the other story is about his wife getting a dog, which he obviously dislikes, giving his cynophobia, and then coming up with this morbid plan to turn her against the dog so he can have all of her affection again. So he can basically be the recipient of all of her affection once more. So this book is very similar to a Stephen King story in that there are twists and turns that end up linking these stories together. And the twist at the end of the issue is pretty obvious, but that also was very Stephen King-esque. Overall, the story is not perfect. And like I mentioned, most of the beats were pretty obvious, but I do think this type of anthology storytelling has legs, and I hope they continue with this series. It'd be awesome to have a monthly horror comic where you don't have to read every issue, but could pick it up at any point at your leisure and get a start-to-finish story that fits within the genre. So the art is also great, and I love that it switched from artist to artist depending on the page and which story was being told. It wasn't as jarring as it may sound like it is, and I thought that it was an interesting way to tell a story. So, obviously, Crypt of Shadows is a throwback, but I think this could be a huge hit in the world, since they're, the world's loving horror again. Black Mirror's excelling on Netflix. You just talked about it. The Twilight Zone's coming back on TV, so I think that they have a recipe for success if they choose to continue.
So you mentioned that you thought that the ending or the connection was kind of obvious. Do you think that it's obvious because, as we've talked about before, we're both big Stephen King fans and we've read a decent amount between the two of us of his work? Do you think it was obvious because you've read some of his work before and you can kind of pick up on some of those cues? Or is it just really cliche?
Probably a little bit of both.
Okay.
I don't see myself as some high and mighty horror expert, but I do think
no.
because of how much we watch, there were some cliches there that were pretty obvious.
Oh, yeah, and I talked about this with my Facebook Live review. I did Escape Room this past Friday, and there was a lot of cliches in that movie, but as I was watching it, the film nerd brain that I have, I couldn't shut that off. I was constantly trying to figure out what was going to happen, and I completely agree with you. We watch so much, we read so much that it might sound pretentious, but a lot of times we see a lot of those things coming. In Escape Room, I did not see the ending coming because it was so fucking stupid. I said that in my review was I would rather have seen them do what I thought they were going to do, because honestly, I thought that was more would have been more entertaining than what we got. But yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Awesome, man. What did you read this week?
So the reason that I didn't think that we were going to double up is I'm actually going to talk about a book that I literally just talked about a couple episodes ago, and that's Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man #2. So if you don't remember, this was written by Tom Taylor, and the art was done by Juan Cabal, or Cabal, I think is how you probably pronounce his name. Like I said, I just talked about #1 a couple of episodes ago, and I normally don't talk about a book this quickly after I just talked about it. I usually let it build up a few issues before I come back to it. But as I talked about recently, I really, really enjoyed the first issue. It kind of checked all of the boxes for what I want and a Spider-Man comic to be. The only tiny complaint I had with the first issue was it felt more like a Peter Parker book than a Spider-Man book, which is not always a bad thing, and I didn't think that it was necessarily horrible in the #1 issue, but I still wanted to see a little bit more Spider-Man in that issue. Luckily, they kind of fixed that. They went on the opposite end of the spectrum for the second issue, which is you don't ever see Peter Parker in this book. In the second issue, it's all Spider-Man. So they definitely made up for that tiny complaint I had in issue #1, and both issues have cliffhangers, and I understand that a lot of comics want to do that, but I hope that that's not something that will happen every single issue, because I've liked the cliffhanger so far, but if issue 3 has a cliffhanger and issue 4 has a cliffhanger, and it just becomes that pattern, then I think I will start to kind of check out a little bit. You can't keep doing that, because then the cliffhangers, either you have to do one or two things. The cliffhangers have to just be more and more ridiculous, and at that point you kind of are going to lose a lot of readers, or you're going to lose a lot of readers because it's going to dilute the cliffhangers if you don't go more and more ridiculous. So I just hope that they don't fall into that pattern. But what really surprised me about this book, and it has a lot to do with the writer, Tom Taylor, I was surprised that he has done Spider-Man and Peter Parker's humor so well, because the reason that I decided to read this book in the first place, because I'm already reading Amazing Spider-Man and I really don't need another monthly Spider-Man book, is the fact that he wrote All New Wolverine, which is a book that I really, really enjoyed. Don't really care about that character, but he wrote that character so well that I was immediately intrigued by that book. And so I wanted to read this book, not just because it's Spider-Man, but also because he is writing it, and he wrote a character I didn't care about and made me care about that character. So I thought that he was going to do a really good job with Peter Parker, which he has, but All New Wolverine isn't funny. And so I didn't know that he was going to be able to pull off the humor. But the humor is pitch perfect in this book, and I really enjoy it. And I think that even if you're reading Amazing Spider-Man, I think that you'll get a kick out of this book as well. They're definitely two different versions of the same character, and I'm really enjoying it so far.
The first time you brought this up, I said I wasn't going to read it, and I'm still not. I mean, I'm reading Amazing Spider-Man, and similar to the point you made, I don't feel like I need another monthly Spider-Man book, but it does sound good.
Yeah, it's really good. I would definitely suggest it for anybody out there that's vaguely intrigued at Spider-Man.
Awesome. So you ready for nerd news?
Yeah, what do you got this week?
So just a few things this week. The first was, I guess, not surprising in hindsight, but obviously Netflix bought Miller World, which is Mark Miller's comic collection, or not collection, his company and the source of like all of the creative things he does. So they announced that they are making a Netflix movie based on the Reborn comic that we talked about a few times on the podcast. It was written by Mark Miller and drawn by Greg Capullo, who we're both big fans of. So they are making this into a movie for Netflix, and the director is going to be Chris McKay, who directed the Lego Batman movie and was or is signed up to direct a Nightwing movie, which I'm assuming has been put on the back burner since he's now going to direct this. But I really like the Reborn story, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I heard about this, and you didn't bring it up, but I think Sandra Bullock is going to star in it. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I forgot. She's producing it, and she may star in it. So I forgot about that part.
Yeah, and so that doesn't really surprise me, considering obviously she was in Bird Box, so she has that connection with Netflix. So I'm definitely excited about it. It was a really cool concept. Greg Capullo's art is amazing. I'm super excited because he's going to Louisville SuperCon, which I went to this past year. It was the first time I'd ever gone to it, and they got him. Unfortunately, they haven't announced that they got Scott Snyder yet. That would be pretty fucking cool, too, if they had both of them come to Louisville. But I know Scott Snyder doesn't really do too many conventions. But I'm super psyched about that. But, yeah, I think this movie could be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix needs a win from, like, a critical standpoint. it seems like everybody watches these movies. Like Bird Box, everyone watched Bird Box, but no one really likes these movies. Like Polar, you didn't even make it through it. People don't really like Bird Box. I mean, Bandersnatch has been pretty well received, I think, but for the most part, Netflix has got to put out some quality content here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Speaking of Netflix, the other thing that they are developing that's right up our alley is a Resident Evil show. So I don't think that there are a ton of details. Obviously, that news came out with the release of Resident Evil 2 on Friday, which I picked up and hope to start playing soon. But yeah, they're kind of going away from the film franchise, and they're going to look at it as a TV show, which I think can work if done correctly.
100%. And I know that you are definitely the bigger Resident Evil fan between the two of us. I know that Resident Evil 4 is if it isn't your favorite video game, it's one of your favorite video games. I know that I played 5 and 6 with you. I played 7 on my own. 7's really good. I love that they went back to like that survival horror aspect to it, because I know 5 and 6 kind of were more action games, which can be fun in their own right, but I know that a lot of hardcore Resident Evil fans were disappointed with that. I never played 2, and I just recently picked it up as well. I'm actually going to start streaming it, not on Monday because I have a dentist appointment, but I'm going to start it on Tuesday. So I'll stream it Tuesday and Thursday, and I'm really looking forward to it because, like I said, I've never played the original, so I have no expectations, but I've seen some tiny clips of some of the gameplay, and it looks really, really good.
Yeah, I read some really good reviews of it. I never played Resident Evil 2 as well because I wasn't really into Resident Evil around the time of the PlayStation because I was more of a Nintendo 64 kid. But, Resident Evil 4 was the first game I played in the franchise, and I absolutely fell in love with the main character, Leon Kennedy, and that's one of the characters you play as in Resident Evil 2. So I'm definitely looking forward to digging into that game.
Yeah, for sure. I actually bought Resident Evil 4 on GameCube a while back. I just haven't had a chance to actually play it, which happens a lot with me, which something that I talked about in our Nerd Year's resolution episode is I need to start working on some of my backlog. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to diving into not just Resident Evil 2, but also Resident Evil 4, because I know that you speak so highly of it.
Yeah, man, it's great. I also downloaded it for Xbox One like a year or two ago and got probably halfway through the campaign and ended up not finishing because as much as it kills me to say it, it didn't hold up as much as I thought it would. It's still a lot of fun, and I bet that if you pick it up, you'll get through it. But for me, it holds like this special place from whenever I first played through it, and it's just not living up to that, so I had to put it down. Cool. So this next one is kind of a weird thing to bring up for nerd news, but I wanted to bring it up because my wife and I just watched the Ted Bundy tapes last night on Netflix. So not surprisingly, with Ted Bundy being back in the mainstream, I guess you could say pop culture, but just people are talking about him again. They released the trailer for the movie that they've been making with Zac Efron as Ted Bundy. It is called, it has some weird dumb title. It's Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile is the name of the movie.
That's real stupid.
Yeah, super stupid. I'm going to take a guess that you probably didn't watch the trailer.
No, and I haven't watched the Ted Bundy files yet either.
Yeah.
We were going to start it last night, but then we decided to do Bandersnatch instead.
Yeah, I really liked the Netflix Ted Bundy tapes or whatever it's called. Like, I would definitely suggest that. But to watch that and see what a piece of shit this guy was, and obviously he's like this notorious serial killer. He killed almost more than 30 women. And then to watch just this trailer, it was extremely jarring. This trailer, while Zac Efron definitely kind of resembles Ted Bundy, unless it's just like a promotional error, they almost paint him to look like some rebel badass in this movie as opposed to this psychopath who killed 30 people. Probably over 30 people. So, I don't know. I'd suggest it's almost worth a watch just to see how much of a misfire this trailer was. But hopefully it's just, them doing it with the promotional material as opposed to the way that the movie's actually going to end up being. Because if you paint this monster like a rebel who shouldn't have been in jail or something like that, like it's a total misstep. So hopefully that's not the case with the actual movie.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll definitely check that out when I post it to this post on our website, because obviously you can check out all of the nerd news that we talk about on our website. Just look for the blog post for each episode. So I will definitely check that out as I'm posting it.
Yeah, so I have one more story, and if you do not want to talk about it on the podcast, you can edit this out. But, because we try to keep things light and we try to keep things kind of nerdy, but I know you shared an article, and our friends at the Obsessive Viewer also shared an article this week about Bryan Singer. And I think that we've both gone on record before about agreeing that Bryan Singer is a piece of shit, and he's always been a piece of shit, and that we're not fans of his. We wouldn't consider ourselves to be fans of his, but obviously that article did get published this week that recounts some acts of sexual molestation of guys that were under 18 at the time. So I just wanted to bring it up because I don't consider myself a journalist by any means, but I figure we got to talk about the bad and the good.
Oh yeah, 100%. I assumed that we would be talking about this, so I definitely won't cut it out. I mean, we've talked about it before as well, and we've alluded to him being a piece of shit before, and I mean, literally, we have said those words before, but to read the article and to have these people describe the things that he did and the things that others did for him and with him, it was it was very eye-opening. Like, I've only heard things in very general terms, and to actually sit there and read multiple stories about how he did this for years and a lot of people knew about it, and the fact that he was still getting jobs. And there was one story where he was doing it on the set of this movie, and it was very disgusting, very disturbing, but at the same time it was, I mean, I hate to say it, but it was interesting to read. Like, it was a very interesting read. It was a very massive read, but it just made me hate the guy even more. And the fact that he still literally has a job. I don't know the movie he's doing, but I think it's either an anime or it's a comic book adaptation.
It's Red Sonja.
Oh, yeah, that's it. And they've literally come out after this article was released and said, oh, we're still going to let him do this thing. And I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? And the fact is, there was multiple people, and even in the article, they said, we've had people back up this description of the set or this description of the boat that they were on or whatever it was. And so, I mean, there's multiple people that have backed up this story, and I don't see how you could read something like that and be like, this guy isn't a piece of shit.
Yeah, I mean, not only does he still have a job, but he's getting paid $10 million to direct Red Sonja, which blows my fucking mind. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, he's a piece of shit, and we've known he's a piece of shit, and this just solidifies that he's a piece of shit. And the fact that he continues to deny it, I think that he came out and said that this article was a homophobic smear campaign, which has nothing to do with any of it. It has everything to do with him molesting somebody that wasn't of age, multiple people that weren't of age. So I don't know, man. It's sick. It's really sick and twisted and really fucked up.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, like, whisper campaigns do exist. Like, as far as the Oscars are concerned, I think Zero Dark 30 was the most notorious example of that, about how, like, I don't know the actual details, but like Congress was investigating how they got some of the information that they used in Zero Dark 30, and then they immediately dropped that case the day after they lost to Argo for Best Picture. So those things happen, and I hate the fact that this piece of shit is using that to confuse people to think that that's actually what's happening here.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's I don't know. I think that probably the release of the article was timed
100%.
Because Bohemian Rhapsody's up for so many awards, but that's that part of it's sick too. Like, this is something that should have been addressed a long time ago. It's all just kind of unfortunate. The question I have for you coming out of this, and the reason I think about this is because I was recently going through my Blu-ray and my DVD collection to pick out things that I don't really want in my collection anymore, and to kind of dwindle it down, because I think both of us are probably past the point of physical media in a lot of cases. And as I was going through my collection, I started pulling out Kevin Spacey movies, and The Usual Suspects is a Kevin Spacey movie directed by Bryan Singer, so I decided to pitch it, but going back and forth on my X-Men movies. So I guess my question is, how does this kind of stuff that comes out about actors and filmmakers that we used to like kind of influence the way that you take in the media that they were responsible for?
I mean, that's kind of a loaded question, and I've thought a little bit about it. I mean, I could still like some of Louis C.K.'s comedy. Like, I still think he's a funny guy, even though I won't support him from now on. I'm kind of taking that same approach with Bryan Singer. Like, I still like the X-Men movies. I'm still probably eventually going to watch them again. I will never watch The Usual Suspects again, but like you said, that kind of has two strikes against it. But I don't know. I will not support him from now on. I didn't know any of this stuff when those movies came out. I didn't even know who Bryan Singer was, to be honest with you, when those movies came out. And the more that we hear about him, obviously the most recent article is super, super damning, like we just talked about. But I will not support him from now on. Anything that he's directed, writed, produced, anything, I'm not going to touch from now on, because apparently that's the only thing that Hollywood cares about, considering he still has a job currently. So I'm just not going to support him at all. But as far as like going back through all my DVDs and Blu-rays and getting rid of any movie that he's ever had a part of, I'm probably not going to go that far, just because, I mean, I didn't know it at the time and I've already given them my money. So it's not like I can retroactively take that away. I will definitely not watch Usual Suspects again, which is a shame because I really enjoy that movie. But I'm probably, like I said, I'm probably done with that one. But other than that, I'm probably not going to go back through and trash all the other movies that he's had a part in. I'll probably never watch House of Cards again. Like, I don't know. I feel like I can compartmentalize to a certain extent their work versus being a piece of shit personally.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it too. I have not gone back and like watched an X-Men movie in quite a while that he was involved with, so I'm curious how my feelings will be, you know, if I sit down and watch Days of Future Past, which is my favorite X-Men movie that he did direct. So, you know, it could completely change that movie for me, but I haven't done it, so I don't know.
So kind of switching to a different topic, we talked about Bohemian Rhapsody and the Oscars and a little bit briefly. I'm surprised that you didn't bring that up in Nerd News, because you said this was our last story.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why. I didn't write that down. I know that you and I had discussed off recording last week that we would probably be doing a preview show for the Oscars where we make predictions. So I thought we'd loop it all in there. But I mean, that being said, we can 100% talk about anything you want to. Like, I know that we both shared some snubs on our Facebook page, so I'm interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed. I didn't think it was gonna happen, but I thought Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther was so good that I thought he should have at least got a nod for Best Supporting Actor. I was a little bit disappointed in that. And of course, Toni Collette didn't get Best Supporting Actress for Hereditary. And then, of course, Eighth Grade not even being nominated for Best Picture, which I posted something from Rotten Tomatoes on our Facebook page that they showed all of the percentages for all the movies that got nominated for Best Picture, and I knew Vice wasn't as popular among the critics as some of the other movies, but to see that in Bohemian Rhapsody, and I don't know why I struggle with those words so much, but to see the percentages alongside the other movies that are in like the 90% is really kind of damning.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a couple Nerd Newses ago, a few episodes ago, I brought up the Rotten Tomatoes awards that they do and how that was probably more in line with our opinions than something like the Oscars. The one thing I will say that I don't agree with was Vice being included in that, because that is 100% dependent on what the political views of that reviewer are. I'm self-aware enough to see that bias. Like, I'm liberal, so when I watch that movie, I like it, whereas somebody who's conservative is, going to most likely hate it. And I know it's not just cut down the middle like that. I know obviously you're a liberal and you didn't love Vice, so it's not the perfect analogy, but a movie like Bohemian Rhapsody, there's no politics to that. Like, it's just genuinely in the 60% because 40% of people did not like it. So I think that you're completely right there. And I think that my biggest I was really upset with Toni Collette not getting a nod, but for sure, Eighth Grade not getting, I don't think it got anything, is fucking criminal. I want to say
something with screenplay. Maybe that was the Golden Globes. I can't remember.
Yeah. I don't think that Bo Burnham got a nomination for screenplay. I could be wrong, but that's fucking criminal because that is the best movie of last year.
100%. And I agree with you to a certain extent with Vice. I just think that it's so weird. Bohemian Rhapsody is not even that bad of a movie. It's just not a great movie. And I just don't understand First of all, how it ever won in the Golden Globes. Well, I actually do know how it won because they probably bought it.
Yes.
Like we've kind of discussed before, and that's the main reason I don't take award shows super seriously anymore. They're fun to talk about, but I don't take who actually wins. Like, I used to think, like, if it won for Best Picture, it was the best movie that year. I literally, in college, made a list of all the Best Pictures, and then I sat out to, like, watch all of the ones I hadn't seen, and I kind of gave up on that after a couple of years because I realized some of these movies are just not my cup of tea, and I just didn't think they were very good, and then I started kind of learning more about how they get nominated and how they actually win, and like the whisper campaigns and how they kind of get bought and stuff like that, and so I started to kind of toss that aside, and I haven't really paid too much attention. I like to watch the movies because I love movies, and I know that we're going to talk about it on the podcast, so I like to see all the Best Picture nominations before the show comes out. But other than that, I don't really pay too much attention to who actually wins as far as that's the best movie this year.
For sure. I mean, we're definitely on the same page there. And at the end of the day, I don't think Bohemian Rhapsody is going to win Best Actor or Best Picture. So there's probably not going to be a lot there for them.
For sure. I actually prefer watching some of the performances more than the actual. Well, I mean, I love watching the movies as well, but as far as like who got nominated for like Best Supporting or Best Actress or Actor, like I like watching those for the performances almost as much as I like watching like, oh, that's nominated for Best Picture. I haven't seen that one. I should probably take that one in before the show. Like I enjoy doing that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. I've seen all but two of the nominees, and I will most
Green
likely...
Book and The Favorite?
No, Green Book and Roma.
I didn't think that Roma got nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, it did.
Oh, maybe it was just not on the list that the Rotten Tomatoes posted. I don't remember. But yeah, then I haven't seen three. I haven't seen The Favorite, I haven't seen Roma, and I haven't seen Green Book. For some reason, I was forgetting about Roma.
The Favorite is a tough watch, man. Like we thought it would be. It is.
Really?
Not. I looked though. I'm definitely in the minority. Like out of all of my friends on Letterboxd that have rated it, I'm one of the lowest. So people tend to like it. So maybe I'm wrong and you'll enjoy it. But I thought it was not great. So I'm curious if you do watch it, what your reaction is.
Oh, I'll see it eventually. I'm not looking forward to it, and maybe that'll skew my opinion is because I'm almost kind of on the verge of dreading it.
Yeah, it's kind of shitty, but that's just my opinion. So,
all right, so on to our main topic. Now that we got nerd news out of the way, we went a little bit long, so we'll see how much we have to say about Punisher season 2. So, like we talked about before, we're going to be reviewing the new Netflix MCU show, one of the last ones we're going to get. Punisher season 2 sees Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, living more of a nomadic life after the events of season 1. He is perfectly content passing through towns on his way to nowhere. That changes when he runs into a girl who is pursued by a network of hired mercenaries trying to obtain information that would damage their client. So I honestly kind of felt weird going into this show because, as we've talked about on past Nerd Newses, I didn't feel like the stakes were that high with the show because all of these Netflix MCU shows have been getting canceled shortly after their last season. So at this point, all we have is Punisher and Jessica Jones left, and I feel like the Punisher is on the chopping block because this is their most recent season, and kind of the pattern for Netflix right now has been, oh, we're going to release the season that we have done, then we're going to wait a couple of months for everybody to watch it, and then we're going to can it. And that's kind of what they've been doing with all of these shows. And so I just, going into this series, this season, I just didn't feel like the stakes were that high because I was like, okay, well, I'm going to watch this, and this is going to be the last season that we're ever going to get, at least for another 2 years. I almost said 10 years for some reason. At least for the next 2 years until maybe they put it on Disney Plus, because I guess that's in their contract that they can't have these characters in anything for 2 years after they cancel the show. And that's going to be it. And so I just didn't feel invested. And a lot of my review is going to be kind of me talking about how I'm just not invested in this season. And I think that has a lot to do with how they chose to go about canceling these shows.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix definitely shot themselves in the foot with that because everybody is going into this show with that same mindset. So, whereas it would have probably been made more sense to just cancel them all at once, instead, everybody's meeting their end about a month after their season comes out. So, mark my words, in a few nerd news, a few weeks will go by and we will be talking about The Punisher being canceled. So that's for sure going to happen. So, but that being said, going into the show, like I'm always excited for something new related to The Punisher. So I was intrigued enough to be excited to watch it. But I also have really soured on these shows over the last few years. So there was definitely a bit of hesitance as well.
For sure. So, as we do with the episode as a whole, we always break down these reviews into segments. The first segment is just kind of a general overview of what we felt about whatever we're reviewing. In this case, obviously, Punisher Season 2. We call it Broad Strokes. So how'd you feel about The Punisher?
So there are 2 Marvel Netflix shows that I'm consistently tempted to make excuses for, even in their worst moments. And those shows are probably, not surprisingly, Daredevil and The Punisher. So it's because out of all of these shows, these are the characters that I'm most familiar with and that I've followed the longest. You know, they both appeared on that Spider-Man show from the 90s that I constantly bring up that I loved. So I've loved them for these characters for quite a long time. So I will say the time for these shows on Netflix is obviously coming to a close, like we just said. So I'm done making excuses. This season is not good. I feel like a broken record here, but these shows are kind of broken records as well. And it's basically nothing of importance happens in the season, and there's no reason that it should have been 13 episodes. All of the ingredients are there to make this season good, but none of that comes together to deliver a decent story.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think it's a big surprise that we're going to agree. I mean, we've already kind of hinted at how we felt about this season earlier in the episode, and generally we kind of feel the same way about most of the things that we review, which sometimes can make boring episodes of the podcast, but that's why we're friends, because we agree on a lot of things. And for me, while I was watching this season of The Punisher, it became pretty clear to me that the character, at least in this universe of Frank Castle, aka The Punisher, is best in small doses, at least in this universe. I really enjoyed season 2 of Daredevil. I think it kind of stacks up the more I watch it with the first season, and a lot of that has to do with Frank Castle in that season, in the first part of that season. I thought he's so fucking good in that, in Daredevil, and the fact that he literally says it in that show, like Daredevil is one bad day away from becoming the Punisher, and I completely agree with that, and they adapted that arc from Daredevil so well. And I remember giving season 1 of Punisher, and maybe this kind of goes back to what you said about making excuses for it, but I remember giving it a somewhat favorable review. But as I watched this season, I tried to remember what happened, because I haven't rewatched it since we reviewed it, and I tried to remember some of the stuff that happened, and I really honestly couldn't. I vaguely remember the hacker and his family and Madani somewhat in that season. And of course we have Billy that pops up in this season as well. But I honestly couldn't remember the plot points from that season. And maybe that's because it's just super, super forgettable. And maybe I was just making excuses, like you said, for the first season. And I would like to revisit it, but at the same time, like I have with video games and movies and what have you, I also have a big backlog of TV that I want to watch, which I made worse when I asked our Facebook listeners if they had any suggestions, because now I have a bigger backlog, but that's beside the point. I don't know. I just never. There's some really cool moments in this show, in this season, but nothing that grabbed my attention like he did in that small dose in season 2 of Daredevil.
Totally agree.
All right, so the next segment is story. So obviously we're just going to break down the multiple story angles of this season without spoiling anything, of course. So how'd you feel about Punisher Season 2?
I think whenever I reflected back on these 13 episodes and the story that was actually told, I don't think that they had a bad concept for the season. It's how the story is put together over 13 episodes that kills me. So Jigsaw being a huge part of this season is naturally the correct way to go after season 1. And while there are still things that I liked about his arc and about how he basically creates an army in this season, the rest of the things they decided to do with the character were pretty dumb. You know, saying
100%.
that he has mental scars instead of physical scars is such a fucking cop-out, especially after the way that he was mangled in season 1. It's just another example of how these shows are refusing to embrace the comics, which I definitely don't get, considering that's all the MCU does, is embrace the comic books. So, you know, also the idea that he shacks up with his psychiatrist, that's such a Joker Harley ripoff. I mean, what would have been the problem with him embracing Jigsaw as this mangled and tortured mob boss? I mean, most of the Punisher's rogue gallery involves the mob, and we've gotten very little of that in these 2 seasons, which is a shame to me. I mean, I could go into the Jigsaw stuff more, but unlike this season of television, I'm going to be brief, which is something that I think that they could take a fucking note on. The other plot line is the one involving Pilgrim and political villains, which I liked a lot more than the Jigsaw plotline. Unfortunately, it was such a slow burn that by the time that I was supposed to start carrying, I was already over the season and was just going through the motions so I could review this for the podcast. I would have loved a 6-episode season just exploring that villain and that plot, but here we are 13 hours later. So the only relationship on the show I genuinely cared about was the Frank and Amy relationship and the camaraderie that they developed. And I think that that's about the most character development that we get this season. And, you know, it's always nice to see the grizzled hard ass care about somebody, but I don't know. If the Punisher doesn't care about something, it's okay too. So I like that they add that layer into his stories, and it adds a little bit of depth to the season, but at the end of the day, it wasn't enough to make me care about the story as a whole.
100%. I just felt like while we were watching this, and you touched on this a little bit with the Jigsaw and then Frank and Amy. Her name is Amy, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my notes, I just kept calling her the girl because he just kept yelling about the girl in this season. I almost felt like we were watching 2 different seasons of the same television series, like pieced together, because it didn't feel like they were cohesive at all.
No.
I mean, you start off this season with Frank protecting the girl from, in my notes, I call Pilgrim Church Boy. As I was taking notes on this season, I kept referring to him as Church Boy in my notes, so that I will continue to call him Church Boy. And then you had the Jigsaw stuff. And there's nothing wrong with having multiple storylines in one season of television. I'm not saying they should have just picked one and went with it, because a lot of TV shows do that. One of our favorite shows of all time, Game of Thrones, does that so fucking well. You have not just 1 or 2, you have like 17 fucking storylines in a season of television on that show, but they are better at weaving them together. They barely weave these storylines together at all. It just felt literally like we were watching 2 different things happen at the same time. And I really liked some of the stuff that when Frank was protecting the girl from Church Boy. Like, that stuff at the very beginning was some of the more memorable moments from the entire season. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying in the intro, is I never really thought that the stakes were too high, because I knew that eventually they were going to get canceled. So I don't know if I just didn't care about the characters because of that. And then they quickly pivoted from Church Boy and Amy, that stuff, to Billy, aka Jigsaw, and we just forgot about that stuff for several episodes. I literally forgot that Pilgrim was even in this show for like 2 or 3 episodes, because you never see him. They start off with the Billy stuff, and then they completely drop that storyline, and then they just pick it back up a few episodes later, and that's the show's fault, because I shouldn't forget that a character even exists in this show. Like, that's how either they didn't develop him well enough at the beginning, or they just didn't put him, like, sprinkle him in enough within once they starting the Jigsaw stuff. And once you get to the Jigsaw stuff, it's pretty fucking stupid. Like, I honestly didn't buy a single aspect of that story arc. I didn't like the fact that, of course, he's this gorgeous guy in the first season, and then Frank literally beats him within an inch of his life, completely disfigures his face, and then he just has a few scars. And then they play it off like he's a fucking monster, and he's really not. He's still a really good-looking guy in this season. He just has a few scars on his face. It's pretty fucking stupid. And then the fact that he can't remember what happened is pretty fucking stupid. And I guess you touched on that a little bit with the mental issues and the mental scars, but I never bought that stuff. And then, of course, the therapist and Jigsaw relationship was so fucking stupid. Literally, my wife, she didn't really watch the show with me, but occasionally I was watching it and she was home, and so she would catch an episode here and there. And literally, there's a scene where I think she stabs him in the hand or something like that with like a pen or something, and then they just hate fuck each other. And my wife literally started like busting out laughing. She's like, that's not realistic at all. And I was like, that's what happens in a porno. Like, that doesn't happen in real life. Like, people don't hate fuck each other like that in real life. Like, that's a porno storyline. And I rolled my eyes. And then later in the season, I don't know if it was that episode or not, I think Frank stabbed somebody in the hand with something, like a knife or something. And I was like, well, if the show has taught us anything, they're about to hate fuck. Like, it's so stupid. I hated that entire storyline. I literally don't care how many windows she got thrown out as a kid. She's not gonna fuck that dude. Like, he's a psychopath. Like, there's no way that she doesn't call the cops on that dude the first night that she finds out that he broke into her apartment. It's ridiculous. Some of the storylines, I mean, they mishandled Jigsaw to the 10th degree in this show.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, man.
All right, performance-wise, how'd you feel about Punisher Season 2?
I don't know. There's a lot of people that you could talk about performance-wise. I'm going to limit it to just talking about a few. So in my broad strokes, I said that the ingredients were there for this to be a good season of TV. And for me, that means the cast was pretty good in the most part, at least what I'm going to talk about. So John Berthnall, I really like as Frank Castle. So that's the biggest bummer for me with these shows ending, is that he may not get to play the character again, and they might not be able to give him an actual Punisher story to perform. So that's a bummer, because I really liked him. I also liked the addition of Amy. The actress who played Amy was Georgia Wigham, which, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't like her, but for me, that added another layer to the Punisher that I appreciated. So I think her storyline was kind of lame, but liked her as an actress for the most part. And the last person I feel like bringing up is Ben Barnes, hashtag not my Jigsaw, because I mean, I can't remember honestly what I said about him in season 1, but he is not great in season 2, and obviously not the Jigsaw I wanted. So for me, that's partially a performance issue as well. I don't know like whose idea it was to do the mental scarring instead of the physical scarring. I read an article that said it was his idea. I'm not going to hold it against him, because it seems silly to me that an actor would have that much of a decision making when it comes to a character like that. But if he just didn't want to be in the prosthetics, like that's lazy to me. So I'm not a fan.
So I do like the fact that they cast John Berthnall as the Punisher. I thought that he was really well cast, and obviously I've raved about his performance and just his character in season 2 of Daredevil, so I won't get into that. Like, I think he, again, is really good as the character in small doses. It feels like, and maybe I just didn't notice it as much in season 1, but I felt like he growled more in this season than he has in the past. Like, I feel like anytime the shit hits the fan, he's just like yelling, but he just has this way of like getting super intense where he's like yelling but also growling at the same time. And I'm not going to do the impression because I'm terrible at impressions, but it was really cringeworthy, like every time he did it, like, and it was just so much more noticeable in this season than it has been in past. And so that kind of took me out of the show a little bit. And Ben Barnes was really fucking bad in this season. Like you, I don't remember what I said about him, but I thought he was a pretty charismatic guy, if I remember correctly. And some of this, again, I've talked about this before. Sometimes it's hard to separate the acting from the material, and I just went through and trashed his arc on this season, so maybe it has a lot to do with that. But when they asked him to carry some of the load as far as emotional weight of this series, he's really fucking bad. Like, there was multiple scenes where he was like basically crying and like slapping himself on the head, and I was just, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I rolled my eyes really hard. Like, it was really bad acting, overacting, all of the worst kinds of stuff was going on in those scenes, and I couldn't get into his character at all, and he was really, really tough to watch for most of this season. I thought that Josh Stewart, who plays Church Boy, was great. I thought that he kind of has a turn, I guess it's like in the middle to the later episodes of the season where you kind of get more character development for him, and he kind of plays almost like he's almost two characters in this show. He has the like super uptight preacher thing going for him where he's very stoic, and I think that he does that really well. And then he kind of has this like Yankee white supremacist like gangster thing going for him later in the season, and they don't really go into too much details about like what that character is. He white supremacist or whatever, but they kind of infer that that's what he is or he was, and then he kind of jumps off the deep end a little bit in a certain aspect, and I'm going to bring up that episode in my notable episodes, so spoiler alert for that discussion. But I thought that he did a really good job playing both of those characters, and so he was honestly probably the best actor or actress in the show for me, at least. Well, I shouldn't say the best actor or actress, because the best actress in the show is, of course, Deborah Ann Woll. She should win all the Emmys. She's a goddess. She's the best actress working today.
As soon as she fucking showed up, I was like, God damn it. Here we go. I thought we were done with this bitch after Daredevil ended, but
you fucking watch your mouth.
No, she honestly, on a show like this, she stands out as being okay.
She's a goddess. Now, she's actually in Escape Room as well, not to pimp that review again, but yeah, I talk a little bit about that as well.
Cool. I'll continue to avoid that video then.
You do that. It wasn't made for you.
I did notice, though, like, side note really quick, that review you did was over 20 minutes, right?
It was almost 40 minutes, actually, I think.
That's fucking ridiculous, man. I set the 8-minute thing for these bad reviews I'm going to have you do this year because I thought that it would take a lot to review a movie for 8 minutes that's so shitty. But I feel like I've got to up that because you've proven with both of your Facebook reviews that your ability to talk knows no bounds.
Oh, yeah. But also, in my defense, what I've learned from live streaming is like when people talk to you on the live chat, like you should interact with like people like that. So people that interact with me on the Facebook Live or on streaming, like I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to interact with you. So that has a little bit to do with it. But also, as we've learned from doing over 200 episodes, I like to talk and I like to monopolize the conversation. So if you leave me to my own devices, it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. I'm just going to keep fucking talking about it.
Well, then on these future reviews, I'm definitely going to jump in and start asking questions. So,
oh yeah, for sure. You should. I mean, I could have talked about the second act for longer, but I was just like, nah, it's getting. I literally woke up and set up my computer and then started reviewing that movie, and so I was kind of tired, and so I was like, nah, I'm done. I hit my 8 minutes like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, for sure, man.
All right, so the last thing that we have to do when we do TV reviews is we both talk about a couple of notable episodes. So I think we normally, if I remember correctly, because we haven't reviewed a TV show in a while, I think we just kind of go back and forth.
Sure, why not? So I thought that we would talk about the action as well, but luckily...
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I skipped over that completely. The escape room Facebook Live thing threw me all off. So, yeah, let's go into the action first. Sorry.
So I don't have a ton to say about the action. Honestly, the season starts out with some really great action, especially when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, especially at that bar. And I really like that stuff. And then the rest of the season kind of turns into mostly blind firefight, which is not good to me. And I think that it may be because John Berthnall legitimately broke his hand. But either way, I expect more from the Punisher in the action, so I was a bit disappointed.
I actually thought that the action in this show was probably the most memorable of the entire season. Like, if it wasn't for some of these really cool action scenes, I would have not cared at all about this show because, like I said, I didn't really buy into a lot of the story aspects of it. I loved the bathroom fight. I thought that it was much better than the Mission Impossible Fallout bathroom scene, mostly because it didn't involve Henry Cavill. Nobody reloaded their arms. But in all seriousness, I just thought that it was more intense because it felt more close quarters. So there wasn't quite as much room to maneuver. And so I thought that it kind of felt more brutal in that sense. I thought the sheriff's station was really cool. Like that scene, them being trapped in the police station was really cool. And then, of course, you have the gym fight where Frank basically beats somebody to being Sloth in the Goonies. So I thought that was pretty cool. The scene in Valhalla where they're kind of crashing Billy's army, like his holdout, was pretty interesting. They did a lot of different things in that scene that I thought was pretty cool. So the action was the high point for me in this show.
Perfect.
All right, so now on to the notable episodes. What was your first one?
So I was pretty much over this show at this point in prepping, and so I did not put a ton of effort into my notable episodes. I legitimately picked two for very silly reasons. And I did not even bother to write down the title of those episodes. So my first is episode 5, which is the episode in which there is a weight fight, like you alluded to, in your action portion. So for me, that was one of the better fight scenes in the show this year. I really liked the idea of there being a hand-to-hand fight with a lot of guys in a weight room, because that's not something you see a lot. And then, like you mentioned, some guy gets his face pummeled with a weight, which is something that I've never seen in a movie or a TV show before. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But anytime that you put the Punisher in a situation where he's got to fight off a lot of dudes, it's pretty cool. So that was one of my favorite fights of the season and why I picked episode 5 as being notable.
So I actually went the other route. So I picked an episode. There's an episode, it's episode 3 called Trouble the Water, where it kind of shows you exactly how I feel about this show in one episode. So that episode, I don't know if it starts off, but it does have a lot of the Billy and the therapist, like early on. Like that's, I think, might even be the first time that you see those two interact together in this show. And I hated all of that stuff with them throughout the season. And so it's kind of like the perfect example of why I hated it. It's just so stupid. And then you have a big action scene in the police station that I talked about a little bit ago. So it was kind of the perfect example of what I hated about this show and what I liked about this show, which was the action. But I also hated the Jigsaw Billy stuff.
Awesome.
All right, so what was your second notable episode?
So I mentioned that I picked my notable episodes for really dumb reasons, and this one takes the cake. So my next one was episode 9, and I legitimately just took this episode because Amy Falcom kicks her friend right in the vag, and I thought that was fucking hilarious. So a little context there is Amy staying with one of her friends who, it turns out, kind of screwed her over a little bit. And as Frank saves her and they're walking out the door, her friend is pleading with her that she didn't mean it and she had to. And on the way out, Amy just kicks her straight up right in the vagina. And Frank thinks it's funny, and I also thought it was pretty funny, and that stood out to me as one of the the funnier moments of the season. So I definitely wanted to call that out.
Yeah, that's a pretty stupid reason for picking it as a notable episode. But I will say that I forgot to mention that scene as far as the action. Like the action in that episode was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, it was that whole firefight of him getting up to Amy and then her using the training that she got to disarm the guy and then not hesitating like he taught her, and she shoots him. Like all that stuff's good too, but the vagina kick is definitely the cherry on top.
All right. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, I'm going to pick an episode where we get to see more of what's his first name? Is it John Pilgrim?
I don't even know if Pilgrim is his name at all. I know his
Scott
name
Pilgrim?
is John. I know his name is John, so that's fair.
Yeah, I think his last name is Pilgrim. I think that's what it is. But anyways, Church Boy. We get to see a little bit more of his backstory in episode 9. Flustercluck is what the episode's called, which is a really stupid name for an episode. But anyways, you get to see like that dual personality thing that I was talking about earlier. And he is one of, I think his name is Josh Stewart, is the guy that plays him. He is, other than the action, is one of the high points of this show for me. And I think that he really shines in this episode. And you kind of, I don't know if you necessarily start empathizing for him because he's still a bad guy in this show, but you're a little bit more sympathetic to him. And so I think that works for later in the season. So I really appreciated his performance, especially in that particular episode.
Awesome. So you ready to put a star rating on this?
Yeah, out of 5 stars, what'd you feel about Punisher Season 2?
I'm going back and forth on a 2 or a 2.5. And I think that it's probably me making excuses again, even though I said I wasn't going to do that, but I'm going to go with a 2.5. And for what it's worth, I would still take a season 3 of this show, despite everything.
I don't know if I would go as far as saying I wanted to watch another season of this show, but I am with you there. I'm definitely going to give it 2.5 just because, like I said, some of the acting is good. Some of the character development, most notably with Church Boy, I think is really good. And then the action. I mean, it's really fun to watch him kick some ass, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. So some of the story stuff definitely needed to be a 2, but the action and some of the character development raised it a little bit for me.
Awesome.
So nerd favorite this week, I'm going to change it up a little bit. If you're not familiar, we like to cap off each episode by asking a very nerdy question, which is what your favorite blank is. Obviously, the topic changes from episode to episode. I wanted to change it up a little bit, and I wanted to talk about our least favorite, a movie franchise. So we have talked about this a lot recently with Bumblebee, with Transformers and my hatred for that movie franchise, and Pirates of the Caribbean with the recasting, well, the reboot, and the fact that they're going to leave off Johnny Depp from that franchise. And so we've talked a lot about me hating on those franchises. And so I wanted to ask you what your least favorite movie franchise of all time is. And those are good ones for me. I definitely dislike those franchises quite a lot. And honestly, for the sake of conversation, Transformers would probably be my least favorite. But since I've talked about that so much, I'm going to get away from that a little bit. And I'm going to talk about one that I really haven't talked about on the podcast before. And that's the Scary Movie franchise. I really never got into those types of movies. Like, I love horror franchises. I love Scream. I love Halloween. And obviously those movies parody those movies a lot. And it's not even that, hey, you're making fun of the thing that I like, because I like to think that I have a pretty good sense of humor, especially when it comes to stuff about me and stuff that I like. Like, I can laugh at stuff that I like. Don't make fun of Planet of the Apes, though, or I'll hate you. But those movies just aren't funny to me. And the fact that they made so many of them, and not just that they made so many of them, but I'm grouping in like the Not Another Teen Movie and those types of movies. Like, I just never thought that those types of movies are funny. They're just the lowest common denominator of comedy. They take something that's so obvious and just make like one joke after another about it. And it really just never got me.
Yeah, that's a really good pick, and that one not obviously, honestly, didn't cross my mind. So in retrospect, that'd probably be something along the lines that I would pick. That being said, I went through a few things, and I think like the easy answer would be, oh, the Medea movies. But
Sure, I thought about those.
Yeah, those movies aren't made for me, and I've not seen all of them, so it's not necessarily fair to just continue to shit on that. Although in March, Pat will have seen.
I
at
will
least
be
one of
seeing
them.
my first one.
Yeah, yes, you will. But I am actually going to pick a franchise that I've not seen all of, but that I still despise, and that's the Fast and the Furious franchise. So, maybe obviously like the Scary Movie franchise, like that's much worse than Fast and the Furious, but this is the set of movies that comes to mind. The ones that I've seen, I've hated. I think that it is bad storytelling, bad movie making. I think that it is a prime example of toxic masculinity, and Vin Diesel's not a good actor. So all of these things combined makes a pretty shitty franchise that continues to make a lot of money from a lot of stupid people, which maybe I should not alienate our listeners that enjoy those movies by calling them stupid, but those movies are stupid. So I'm just going to go with it. So yeah, Fast and the Furious, not my cup of tea, obviously.
Yeah, that's a good one too. And I haven't seen a lot of those movies, so that's why I didn't pick it. And I've never seen a Medea movie, so I'm not looking forward to that. That was one that I thought of, but then I knew that I was going to hate those movies so much that I didn't even bother to go see. But like you said, you made a really good point that those movies aren't made for us. So, there's no reason for me to even go to that movie unless somebody is making me go see it, which is the case for the upcoming one in March, which I'm definitely not looking forward to. I can't decide if I'm not looking forward to that one or the Christian movie more. Like, I think probably the Christian movie is going to be the worst of the two, because I think I might find some humor in the Medea movie. Maybe like once or twice in that movie I might smile or chuckle or whatever. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to either one of those movies. But yeah, the Fast and the Furious is a good choice just because we reviewed the latest one, and I think even in the review I asked you, like, when did you start to question whether or not this was a bad idea? And I think like they hadn't even left Cuba, and I was already like, why the fuck am I watching this movie?
Yeah, that sums it up. That sums up the franchise for me. It's just bad. It's really bad.
100%. So that is it for episode 225 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Hopefully I can do this outro a lot better than I did the intro. So if you enjoyed this episode, which of course we hope that you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're on it. You could also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Those are both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdyourlookingfor@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.